I heard my father's voice before I even reached the porch. "She'll come around. She always does." The porch light was on. The living room glowed warm and steady through the blinds. Like nothing inside had shifted. Like I wasn't standing there in the dark with my car engine still ticking behind me and my heart pounding in my ears. I slid my key into the lock out of habit. It didn't turn. I tried again. Slower this time. Pressing my shoulder against the door the way I had 100 times growing up when it stuck in humid weather. Nothing. The metal felt new under my fingers. Smooth. Unfamiliar. That was when it hit me. They hadn't changed the locks because they were angry. They hadn't done it in the heat of an argument. They had done it because they were certain. Certain that I would bow my head again. Certain that I would cave. Apologize. And sell the house my grandmother left me to pay my sister's 6-figure debt. I stood there on my own porch, holding the key to a house I legally owned, listening to my father reassure my sister that I would give in. That was the moment I understood this was never about her debt. It was about control. Earlier that afternoon, I had been at work, buried in a product rollout meeting, when my phone buzzed with my father's name. He rarely called during business hours unless something was wrong with the house. A pipe, a breaker, a roof shingle torn loose in a storm. I stepped into the hallway to answer. His voice was already heavy when I said hello. "Melissa's in trouble," he said. Of course she was. He explained it carefully. Like he'd rehearsed. Her boutique business had collapsed. Suppliers were threatening a lawsuit. Credit cards maxed out. Investors demanding repayment. The number he finally admitted to made my stomach tighten. 6 figures. "She's drowning," he said. "And we have a solution. I leaned against the wall outside the conference room and closed my eyes. "The house," he continued. "It's just an asset. Courtney, we sell it. Pay off the debt. And everyone moves forward. The house. The brick 2-story my grandmother Eleanor left to me when I was 17. The one I'd paid property taxes on for 9 years. The one I replaced the roof on after a hurricane clipped Charlotte. The one where my father and Diane had been staying temporarily since I left for college. You want me to sell it?" I said. "It's the right thing to do," he replied. "Family takes care of family." I asked how much Melissa had tried to pay down herself. Silence. I asked whether she'd considered bankruptcy. A sharper silence. Then he shifted. "You've always been the strong one," he said softly. "You can handle starting over. She can't." There it was. The compliment that had never been a compliment. I thought about the winter I'd wired money to fix the furnace while living in a 1-bedroom apartment and eating pasta 3 nights a week to save. I thought about the property insurance bill that hit the same month my car needed new tires. I thought about the small business loan I'd co-signed for Melissa 3 years ago when she swore her online shop was about to explode, and how my credit score had dipped when she missed payments. I'd covered that quietly. No applause. No family meeting. Just a transfer and a lesson. "I'm not selling the house," I said. He didn't argue right away. That was what unsettled me. "Think about it," he replied finally. "Don't make a decision you'll regret." The call ended, but the air around me felt different. He hadn't sounded desperate. He'd sounded prepared. Now I stood outside the same house hours later, staring at a lock that no longer belonged to me. I knocked once. The door opened a few inches. My father stood behind it, jaw set. One hand braced against the frame as if he were holding back something larger than wood and hinges. "You can't just lock me out," I said. "You made your choice," he replied evenly. "Until you reconsider. You don't need access." Behind him, I saw Diane in the hallway, phone in her hand. Watching me like this was a scene she'd already storyboarded. "You changed the locks without telling me," I said. "You left us no option. No option." I stepped back, scanning the front yard without meaning to. That was when I noticed it. A small sign staked low near the side hedge, half turned away from the street. "Coming soon." A realtor's logo in the corner. My pulse slowed instead of spiking. That frightened me more than anger would have. "You already listed it," I said. My father didn't answer directly. We were exploring solutions. Solutions. Not conversations. Not compromises. Solutions. In that instant, I understood something with a clarity that felt almost clinical. This wasn't a reaction to my refusal. This had been in motion before he ever called me. They hadn't waited to see if I would agree. They'd assumed I would. I took out my phone. You calling someone? He asked. Suspicion replacing confidence. Yes, I said. But not him. Not Melissa. My attorney. As the line rang, I looked up at the windows of the house I'd grown up in. I remembered standing in that same doorway at 15, after my mother died, watching strangers bring casseroles and whisper about how strong I was. Strong. I'd worn that word like armor for almost 2 decades. Tonight, I was done using it as a leash. My attorney picked up on the second ring. I explained the situation calmly, as if I were reporting a delayed shipment instead of being locked out of my own property. Stay where you are, she said. I'm calling the police. Through the narrow opening of the door, my father's eyes narrowed. You're not seriously involving the police, he said. I held his gaze. You changed the locks, I replied. You involved them. In the distance, I heard the faint wail of sirens cutting through the Carolina night. They thought changing the locks would scare me back into being the good daughter. They forgot something important. I was no longer the girl who needed their approval. The blue lights hadn't reached the driveway yet, but I could already feel the shift. You've always been the strong one. That was what my father had said earlier that afternoon. Like it was praise. Standing there on the porch, locked out of my own house. I realized that sentence had shaped my entire life. It started when I was 15. I still remember the smell of antiseptic in the hospital room when my mother died. The machines beeped in different rhythms. My father stood at the foot of the bed, shoulders shaking in a way I'd never seen before. I kept waiting for her to open her eyes and call me baby one more time. I kept thinking if I didn't cry, if I stayed steady, someone would notice and take care of me. No one did. 5 months after the funeral, my father told me we needed a fresh start. That was the phrase. Fresh start. As if grief were something we could sweep into a corner and cover with new paint. That was when Diane entered our lives. She was polite, composed, always smiling in a way that never quite reached her eyes. The first time she came over for dinner, she hugged me and said, "We're going to make this house feel warm again." Warm. Apparently, meant different. Within weeks, the framed photos of my mother were rearranged, then quietly removed. The living room curtains changed. The couch my mother loved was replaced with something beige and forgettable. Diane said it was about moving forward. My father nodded along. Melissa moved in not long after. She was a year younger than me and carried herself like someone perpetually on the verge of heartbreak. She was sensitive. My father would say, creative, still finding herself. When she quit her first part-time job because the manager didn't respect her vibe, Diane took her out for ice cream. When I picked up extra shifts at the bookstore to save for college, my father told relatives I was independent. Sensitive earned comfort. Independent earned expectation. By the time I was 16, the pattern was set. Melissa forgot to pay her first credit card bill. My father paid it quietly and told her to be more careful next time. When I asked for help replacing my broken laptop before senior year, he suggested I apply for a scholarship or work more hours. "You're strong," he said. "You'll figure it out." At Thanksgiving, Diane praised Melissa for trying so hard. When the dishes were done and the house was clean, my father patted my shoulder and thanked me for handling things. Trying earned applause. Handling things earned silence. The only adult who ever seemed to notice the difference was my grandmother, Eleanor Hayes. She lived in a brick house in a quiet suburb outside Charlotte. Everything in her home had a place. Every bill was filed. Every receipt dated. When I visited, she'd sit at the kitchen table with her glasses low on her nose and ask me how I was really doing. Not how school was, not how Melissa was, how I was. She started teaching me things no one else did. How property taxes worked. what a lien meant, why you never sign something you haven't read twice. She showed me the difference between ownership and occupancy, between sentiment and documentation. Family can love you, she once told me, tapping a stack of papers with her pen, and still misuse you. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. When she died unexpectedly 2 years later, I was 17 and barely steady on my feet. The lawyer's office smelled like coffee and polished wood. My father sat upright, already discussing what repairs the house might need. The will was read calmly. The house, the 2 rental properties, a modest investment account, all left to me. Silence fell like something physical. My father blinked once, then leaned forward. That's not what she told me. The lawyer didn't waver. The will is clear. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exposed. On the drive home, Diane said gently, "That's a big responsibility for someone your age." My father didn't speak to me the rest of the night. After that, the tone in the house shifted. Not openly hostile, just different. I was suddenly lucky, fortunate, privileged, never trusted. When I left for college, Diane suggested they move into my grandmother's house temporarily. "It shouldn't sit empty," she said. "We'll keep it maintained." I wanted peace. I wanted to believe cooperation would protect what little family I had left. So I agreed. Years passed. I studied information systems, took internships, landed a job as a project manager in tech. I paid property taxes on time. I covered repairs. I transferred money for maintenance without complaint. Meanwhile, Melissa tried business after business. An online boutique, a handmade candle line, a small real estate flip with friends from church. Each one failed. Each one was framed as a learning experience. "You know how fragile she is," Diane would say. I knew something else. 3 years ago, when Melissa needed a small business loan, I co-signed. She promised it was temporary. Payments were missed. My credit score dipped. I wired the overdue amount quietly because I couldn't afford the damage. When I confronted her, she cried. When I confronted my father, he sighed. "She's under pressure. Don't make this worse." That was the moment something hardened in me. Standing on the porch now, listening to sirens grow louder in the distance, I saw the pattern with brutal clarity. When Melissa struggled, the family rallied. When I succeeded, the family recalculated. They didn't resent me for having the house. They resented me for not surrendering it. The police cruiser turned into the driveway, blue lights reflecting off the windows I'd grown up looking out of. My father opened the door fully this time, stepping onto the porch as if nothing was out of place. For a split second, I saw the man who used to carry me on his shoulders at county fairs. Then I remembered the new lock under my fingertips. Strength, I realized, had never meant resilience to them. It had meant compliance. And tonight, for the first time, I wasn't complying. The police officer stepped out of the cruiser with the kind of calm that made everything feel more serious. "Evening," he said, looking from me to my father. "What seems to be the issue?" "My daughter is overreacting," my father replied before I could speak. His tone was steady, almost amused. "This is a family matter." I held out my driver's license with a hand that didn't shake. "I'm the legal owner of this property," I said. "The locks were changed without my permission, and I was denied entry." The officer glanced at the door, then back at my father. "Sir, do you live here?" "For 9 years," my father answered. "That has to count for something." "Do you pay rent?" A pause. "We're family," he said, as if that closed the case. The officer didn't react. "Do you have a lease agreement?" "No." "Do you have documentation showing you have authority to change the locks?" Silence stretched across the porch. Behind him, Diane hovered in the hallway, her phone angled slightly upward. "Recording?" As the officer asked for identification, my mind did something strange. It drifted, not away from the moment, but deeper into it. I began mentally listing every check I had written over the past 9 years. Property taxes, paid every spring without fail. Homeowners insurance premiums. The year the roof shingles ripped loose after a tropical storm brushed the Carolinas. The HVAC replacement 2 summers ago when the system died in August heat. The plumbing repair on Christmas Eve when pipes burst in the downstairs bathroom. Each time, I wired the money. Each time, I didn't ask for reimbursement. I had been living in a 1-bedroom apartment during most of that time. Budgeting carefully. Saying no to vacations and unnecessary upgrades because I believed maintaining the inheritance was part of honoring my grandmother. They lived there rent-free, the officer asked. Is this property currently listed for sale? No, I said immediately. My attorney, who had arrived minutes earlier and now stood beside me scrolling through her phone, looked up. Actually, she said evenly, there appears to be a draft listing. She turned the screen toward the officer. A real estate website. Photos of the living room. The backyard. The kitchen I'd helped repaint in high school. Marked coming soon. My stomach dropped. Not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed everything. I never authorized that, I said. My father cleared his throat. We were exploring options. Nothing was finalized. Did you have written authorization from the deed holder? The officer asked. No, he snapped. Because she's my daughter. The officer's voice remained flat. That's not what I asked. I watched something flicker across my father's face, then, not fear, irritation, as if the rules were inconveniencing him. While they spoke, another memory surfaced, uninvited. 3 years ago, Melissa sitting at the kitchen table, twisting a bracelet around her wrist, explaining how her online boutique just needed a little more time. A small loan would stabilize inventory. Investors were interested. I had co-signed because I wanted to believe supporting her would bring balance back into the family. 2 months later, payments were missed. My credit score dropped nearly 40 points. When I confronted Melissa, she cried and said she was overwhelmed. When I confronted my father, he said, she's fragile right now. Don't add pressure. I paid the overdue amount myself to protect my credit. No one called me fragile. Back on the porch, the officer's tone shifted slightly. Sir, if you changed the locks without legal authority and denied access to the deed holder, that may constitute unlawful exclusion. My father folded his arms. We've lived here almost a decade. That means something. It means you've occupied the property, the officer replied. It doesn't mean you own it. My attorney stepped forward and handed over printed copies of the deed, tax statements, and proof of payment history. My name sat clearly at the top of every page. The officer studied them briefly, then looked at my father. You need to restore access immediately. Diane lowered her phone slightly. This is humiliating, she muttered. I didn't respond. I was too focused on the sound of the new deadbolt turning as my father unlocked the door. When I stepped inside, the house felt rearranged in ways that went beyond furniture. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint. A stack of moving boxes sat near the staircase. I walked toward my bedroom. The door was open. My closet stood half empty, clothes folded into plastic bins. My bed frame had been partially disassembled. The quilt my grandmother had sewn for me was folded at the foot of the mattress like it was waiting to be removed. Across the hall, I saw Melissa's storage containers stacked neatly, labeled in black marker. They hadn't been waiting for my agreement. They had been preparing for my compliance. I turned back toward the living room where the officer stood with my father. I want to file formal eviction proceedings, I said, my voice steady. Diane inhaled sharply. Courtney, don't be dramatic. My father's expression hardened. You would evict your own family? You locked me out of my own house, I replied. The officer explained the process calmly. A written notice. A timeline. No further lock changes. No interference with my access. My father listened, jaw tight, eyes fixed on a point just past my shoulder. When the officer finished documenting the incident, he looked at both of us. This is now a legal matter. I suggest you handle it through the courts. The cruiser pulled away minutes later, leaving the driveway quiet again. Inside, the tension felt thicker. You think this is over? My father said quietly once the door closed. I think it's documented. I answered. Diane's fingers moved quickly across her phone screen. I didn't need to see it to know she was already shaping the narrative. As my attorney and I stepped back onto the porch, she leaned closer to me. Be prepared, she said softly. They're going to make this public. I looked at the coming soon sign near the hedges one more time. They thought changing the locks was leverage. They hadn't realized I was about to change the rules. I woke up the next morning to my phone vibrating nonstop on my nightstand. At first I thought it was work. A missed deadline. A system outage. Something predictable. It wasn't. There were 17 missed calls. Dozens of texts. Notifications from Facebook. Instagram. Even a church group thread I hadn't opened in years. I opened the first message from my aunt. How could you do this to your father? The second was from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. Saw the video? I'm disappointed in you. Video? My stomach tightened. I opened Facebook. Diane had posted a clip from the night before. It was 30 seconds long. Just long enough to show me standing on the porch saying, I'm filing eviction. No context. No footage of the changed locks. No mention of the unauthorized real estate listing. No explanation. The caption read, When success changes your heart? Comments were already stacking up. Praying for reconciliation. Money isn't everything. I can't believe children treat parents this way. I stared at the screen, surprised less by the cruelty and more by the speed. It had taken them less than 12 hours to build a narrative. My father wasn't a man who had changed the locks on a house he didn't own. He was a displaced parent. Melissa wasn't someone drowning in debt from failed businesses. She was a struggling daughter abandoned by her cold sister. By noon, someone had shared the clip into a local church community group. The comments there cut deeper. Honor your father and mother. This generation has no respect. Greedy landlord behavior. Landlord. I almost laughed at that. I had never charged my father a cent of rent. My attorney called just after lunch. Do not respond publicly, she said immediately. Not a single comment. Let them talk. They're turning this into a morality play. I said, They can try, she replied. We're keeping it a legal matter. She confirmed the eviction hearing was scheduled in 2 weeks. She asked if there was anything else she should know. Any financial ties? Any agreements that could complicate things? I hesitated, then told her about the co-signed loan from 3 years ago, the missed payments, the damage to my credit, and the listing. I added, They had photos taken last month. There was a pause on the line. That suggests intent, she said carefully. Send me screenshots of everything. That afternoon, she forwarded me something else. Utility records. The electric and water accounts at the house had been switched into my father's name 2 months earlier. They may attempt to establish residency strength, she explained. Length of occupancy doesn't override title, but it can muddy the narrative. Muddy the narrative. That phrase echoed in my mind. They weren't reacting emotionally. They were building a case. Melissa texted me around 4. Can we talk? Just us. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a cafe halfway between our apartments. She looked tired. Mascara slightly smudged. Hair pulled back in a rushed ponytail. I didn't know they'd call the police, she said before I even sat down. They changed the locks, I replied. She flinched. I'm being sued. She continued. Suppliers. And some of the investors are threatening legal action. Dad panicked. How much? I asked. She quoted the same number my father had. I didn't tell her yet that I'd seen different figures online. Did you ask him to change the locks? I asked quietly. She stared at her coffee. He thought if you came home and saw how serious it was, you'd understand. Did you tell your investors the house would be sold? Her head snapped up slightly. It was a possibility. Melissa. She didn't answer. In that silence, I understood something that hurt more than anger. She had already factored my property into her survival plan. It wasn't hypothetical. It was leverage. When I returned to work the next day, HR asked me to step into a conference room. There's been a complaint, my manager said gently. An anonymous email had been sent to the company alleging that I was involved in unethical landlord practices and illegally evicting elderly family members. Attached was the same edited video. My chest tightened. Not from guilt, but from the audacity. This is a private property dispute, I said evenly, and it's being handled through the courts. They nodded, but the implication lingered in the air. Reputation damage spreads faster than documentation. That evening, my father sent me a text. You're humiliating this family. People are talking. You'll regret this. I stared at the message for a long time. Then another came. If you think your job won't be affected, think again. That was the first time something in me felt close to fear. I forwarded the texts to my attorney. This crosses into harassment, she said. If it continues, we file for a restraining order. A restraining order. Eviction felt procedural. That felt final. Before I could sit with the weight of that thought, my email pinged. A formal notice from a law firm representing one of Melissa's suppliers. The amount listed in the lawsuit was nearly double what my father had told me. I read it twice to be sure. He hadn't just minimized the number. He had cut it in half. The real figure was catastrophic. Selling the house wouldn't have fixed it. It would have barely contained it. I closed my laptop slowly. They hadn't just changed the locks. They had changed the size of the truth. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and old paper. I arrived early, my attorney walking beside me with a leather folder tucked under her arm. The sky over Charlotte was flat and gray, the kind of morning that made everything feel suspended. My father was already there. He stood near the metal detector with Diane and Melissa. Dressed in a navy blazer like he was attending a church board meeting instead of an eviction hearing. Melissa's arms were folded tightly across her chest. Diane kept leaning in to whisper something in his ear. For a second, I felt 15 again, standing outside a principal's office waiting to be told what I'd done wrong. Then my attorney said quietly, "Stay steady." We took our seats inside the courtroom. The benches were hard. The air felt heavier than it should have. When our case was called, my father walked forward first, chin lifted. I followed, aware of every step. The judge skimmed the file briefly, then looked up. This is regarding unlawful lock change and formal eviction proceedings. Yes, Your Honor, my attorney said. She began calmly. The deed in my name, the property tax records for 9 consecutive years, the maintenance receipts, the documentation showing the locks had been changed without my consent. The judge turned to my father. Do you have a lease agreement with the property owner? No, he said stiffly. Do you have documentation granting you ownership interest in the property? No. Did you change the locks? A pause. Yes, he said finally. But only because she was acting irrationally. The judge's expression didn't change. The deed holder's actions are not the issue here. The issue is whether you had legal authority to deny access. My father inhaled slowly. I raised her. That house has been our home for nearly a decade. The judge nodded once. Length of occupancy does not override legal title. Hearing those words spoken aloud felt like oxygen entering a sealed room. My attorney then introduced something new. We would also like to submit evidence of an unauthorized real estate listing draft, she said. She handed over printed screenshots of the coming soon listing, complete with realtor information and staged photographs. The judge reviewed them briefly. Did you authorize this listing? He asked me. No, Your Honor. He turned back to my father. Did you? We were exploring options, he replied. Without the deed holder's written consent. Silence. The judge's pen tapped lightly against the file. Attempting to list a property without authorization strengthens the argument of unlawful intent. I saw Diane's jaw tighten. Melissa stared at the floor. My attorney wasn't finished. She requested that the court take judicial notice of Melissa's pending lawsuit, which had been cited as the reason for pressuring me to sell. The judge allowed it. When the amount was read aloud, Melissa's head snapped up. It was nearly double the figure my father had quoted to me. The courtroom went very still. My father shifted slightly. "That number includes projected damages," he muttered. "Regardless," the judge said evenly, "misrepresenting financial urgency does not grant you ownership rights." For the first time, I saw something flicker in my father's expression that wasn't confidence. The judge leaned back. "The court finds that the lock change was unlawful. The eviction request is granted. You will vacate the property within the statutory period. No further interference with the property owner's access is permitted." The gavel came down softly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was procedural. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt narrower. My father approached me before I could reach the exit. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "I didn't come here to win," I replied. "I came here to document. You don't understand what you've started," he said, his voice low. "I understand exactly what you started," I answered. Diane stepped forward. "The family won't forget this." Melissa finally spoke. "You always get everything." I looked at her carefully. "I paid for it," I said. She shook her head like she genuinely didn't believe that was true. I walked away before the conversation could stretch into something uglier. That night, I was home reviewing emails when my phone buzzed with a security alert. "Motion detected at rental property 3. I opened the camera feed. It showed the driveway of the duplex I'd purchased 4 years ago. One of the tenants, Mrs. Alvarez, stood near her car. Across from her was my father. He was gesturing with his hands, speaking in that authoritative tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. I turned up the audio. "There's been some confusion," he was saying. "I'm the real owner. My daughter handles paperwork. But ultimately this is a family property." Mrs. Alvarez looked uncertain. My chest tightened. He was positioning himself as landlord. The police cruiser's lights appeared at the edge of the camera frame moments later. Someone must have called. Officers stepped out. They spoke to him briefly. I watched him gesture toward the building, toward the door, toward the sky as if facts could be rearranged by volume. One officer turned toward Mrs. Alvarez and asked her something. She pointed toward the camera. Toward me. My phone vibrated again. It was her. I didn't know who to believe, she said nervously. "He said you might be selling and that he needed access." "You did the right thing," I said. On the screen, I watched the officers request identification. I watched my father's posture stiffen. This wasn't a civil disagreement anymore. It was trespassing. The officer placed a hand lightly on his arm. Not aggressive, just firm. As they guided him toward the cruiser, I felt something shift inside me. Changing the locks had been a statement. This was becoming a crime. I watched my father get handcuffed through the grainy glow of a security app on my phone. The image was small, almost distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. He stood beside the duplex driveway, shoulders rigid, arguing with an officer whose patience looked thin but controlled. "I'm telling you, this is family property," he insisted. The officer didn't raise his voice. "Sir, the deed holder is not you. You've already been informed of that." Mrs. Alvarez stood near her car, clutching her purse, clearly shaken. I hated that he had pulled her into this. My tenant, a woman in her 60s who paid her rent early and baked empanadas at Christmas. My father pointed toward the building again. "There's been confusion," the officer replied. "Misrepresenting ownership to a tenant is not confusion." They asked him to step away from the door. He refused. That was when the tone shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, just a tightening of procedure. The click of metal. When the handcuffs closed around his wrists, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not grief. Relief. Hours later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. "Collect call from Mecklenburg County Detention Center," the automated voice announced. I accepted. "Courtney?" My father said, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. Not angry, not persuasive, just strained. "You lied to my tenant," I said before he could start. I was clarifying ownership. You told her you were the real owner. It's complicated. It's not, I replied. The deed has my name. There was silence on the line. Then a shift in his tone. You don't understand what's at stake here, he said. Melissa's situation is bigger than you think. You already lied about how big it was, I said. He exhaled sharply. I was protecting you from panic. No, I answered. You were protecting yourself from accountability. The line went quiet. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I raised you, he said finally. And this is what you do. I closed my eyes. You raised me to handle things, I said. I'm handling this. When the call ended, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. Strength. That word had followed me like a shadow. Strong enough not to cry. Strong enough not to ask for help. Strong enough to cover someone else's debt quietly. Strength had always meant absorbing impact. Now it meant refusing to. The next morning, my attorney called. With the second incident, I strongly recommend filing for a restraining order, she said. He approached a tenant and misrepresented ownership. That's escalation. A restraining order. Eviction had felt administrative. Clean, businesslike. This felt like cutting blood from bone. If I file it, I asked, what happens? It formalizes no contact, she said. He cannot approach you, your workplace, or your tenants. Violations become additional charges. I looked around my apartment, at the stack of folders on my desk labeled taxes, insurance, LLC draft. He had already crossed lines I never thought he would. I'll sign it, I said. The paperwork arrived electronically within the hour. I signed where instructed, a boundary in black ink. By noon, the extended family began calling. My uncle left a voicemail. You're putting your own father in jail over property. My aunt texted, is money really worth this? No one asked why he told a tenant he was the owner. No one asked why he changed the locks. Diane's call came late in the afternoon. You're tearing this family apart, she said without greeting. I didn't approach a tenant, I replied. He's under pressure. So am I. He feels betrayed. He changed the locks, I said evenly. She didn't respond to that. That evening, there was a brief court appearance regarding the trespassing charge. I attended quietly, sitting in the back. My father was brought in wearing the same navy blazer from the eviction hearing. Though it hung looser now, the judge reviewed the file. Unlawful exclusion at primary residence. He read, subsequent trespass at secondary property. My father's attorney argued that it was a misunderstanding between family members. The judge's eyes didn't soften. There is a documented pattern here. Bond was set higher than before. Not denied entirely, but increased. When my father turned and saw me in the courtroom, something changed in his expression. Not fury, shock, as if he still believed, even now, that I would intervene, that I would stand up and say it had all gone too far. I didn't move. Afterward, as I walked toward the parking lot, my phone buzzed again. Diane. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. This time, I answered. Her voice was different. Quieter. There's something about the house you don't know, she said. I stopped walking. What does that mean? There was a pause, long enough to make my pulse quicken. You should check the title history, she said carefully. From about 3 years ago. My grip tightened on my phone. What did he try to do? I asked. Another pause. You need to look at the paperwork, she replied. That's all I'm saying. The line disconnected. I stood in the parking lot. The courthouse behind me. The afternoon sun sharp against the pavement. The locks had been changed last week. The listing had been drafted last month. The trespass had happened yesterday. But now I wondered if this had started much earlier. For the first time, I considered the possibility that the locks weren't the first thing he had tried to change. I didn't sleep that night. Diane's words looped in my head. You should check the title history. The next morning, I was in my attorney's office before 9. She had already requested a full title report on the house my grandmother left me. We sat across from each other at a long conference table while she scrolled through public records on her laptop. There was a refinance inquiry filed 3 years ago, she said finally. My stomach tightened. In whose name? I asked. She turned the screen toward me. Primary resident? Richard Bell. Property holder listed incorrectly as co-occupant. Not sole owner. Not deed holder. Co-occupant. He listed himself as primary resident and you as secondary, she explained. That's inaccurate. I stared at the date. 3 years ago. The same year Melissa's first boutique collapsed. The same year I co-signed her loan. What kind of refinance? I asked. Home equity loan application, she said. Substantial amount. Enough to make my chest feel hollow. Was it approved? No, she said. It was denied due to documentation mismatch. The title records didn't align. Denied. But attempted. That means he tried to borrow against my house. I said slowly. Yes. Without telling me? Without my consent. She scrolled further. There's more, she said. Attached to the digital application was a scanned authorization page. My name appeared on the signature line. But it wasn't my signature. The curve of the C was too sharp. The tail of the Y too short. It was close enough to pass at a glance. Not close enough to be mine. That could qualify as attempted forgery, my attorney said carefully. I felt something colder than anger settle into my chest. If that loan had been approved, there would have been a lien placed on my property. Payments due. Interest accumulating. And I wouldn't have known until the notices arrived. He said this was about family, I murmured. My attorney didn't respond. We checked the timeline again. The refinance attempt lined up precisely with Melissa's first major business collapse. This wasn't a new plan. Selling the house now had simply been Plan B. They built a strategy around the assumption I would say yes, I said quietly. Yes, my attorney replied. Later that week. There was a short procedural hearing regarding the trespassing charge. I attended again, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see him. When my father was brought in, he looked more tired than before. After the session ended, I approached him within the boundaries of the restraining order, keeping distance. Did you try to refinance my house 3 years ago? I asked. His eyes flickered. It was for the family, he said. That's not what I asked. He looked past me toward the exit. You weren't using the equity, he continued. It was just sitting there. It wasn't yours, I said. It's our family home. No, I replied evenly. It's mine. For a second, I thought he might deny the signature. He didn't. He just said, you don't understand what pressure feels like. I stepped back. I understand it perfectly, I said. I've been carrying it since I was 15. He didn't answer. That afternoon, Diane asked to meet in a parking lot near her office. She looked different, not composed, not rehearsed. He didn't tell you everything, she said. Clearly, she exhaled slowly. There were gambling debts. I blinked. Not casinos, she added quickly. Sports betting. Small amounts at first. Then larger. How large? I asked. She hesitated. Enough. And Melissa's losses made it worse, I said. Yes. So he tried to leverage my house. She nodded. I thought if he could refinance, it would stabilize things, she said. I thought protecting him would protect all of us. You protected the problem, I replied. Her eyes filled briefly, but I felt no urge to comfort her. For years, I had mistaken silence for peace. Now I saw it for what it was. Enabling. Back at my attorney's office. We discussed options. You could pursue civil action for attempted fraud, she said. It would escalate the criminal exposure. I considered it. Part of me wanted every attempt documented. Every misstep recorded in a way that couldn't be rewritten at Sunday dinner. But another part of me understood something else. I don't want punishment, I said finally. I want distance. She nodded. We'll document it, she said. If he violates the restraining order again, we revisit? That evening, I drove to the inherited house alone. It was quiet. No moving boxes now. No tension vibrating through the walls. I stood in the living room and ran my hand over the mantel my grandmother had polished every spring. At 15, I had stood in this doorway after my mother died, feeling like the ground beneath me had dissolved. At 17, I had sat at a lawyer's table and inherited something that felt heavier than property. Now, at 34, I understood something with painful clarity. I hadn't been fighting for bricks and wood. I had been fighting for proof that my boundaries mattered. The locks were symbolic. The listing was strategic. But the paperwork told the real story. I left the house and called my attorney the next morning. I want all properties transferred into an LLC immediately. I said, We're already drafting it, she replied. Within days, the filings were submitted. Asset protection layered properly. Access tightened. Documentation airtight. A week later, I received notice that Melissa had officially filed for bankruptcy. Her business was under investigation following investor complaints. Another layer peeling back. I stared at the letter in my kitchen, sunlight cutting across the page. The locks had never been the real betrayal. The paperwork was... The final hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. I sat in the same courtroom where the eviction had been granted and the trespassing charge reviewed. Only this time there was nothing left to argue. The judge summarized the pattern calmly. Unlawful lock change. Criminal trespass. Misrepresentation of ownership. A no-contact order already in place. My father stood at the defense table, shoulders slightly rounded, hands resting flat against the wood as if he needed the support. The conditions of release will remain, the judge said. No contact with the petitioner. No approach to her properties or tenants. Any violation will result in immediate revocation. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No gasps. Just consequences. When my father turned to leave, he looked older than his 58 years. Not fragile. Just diminished. As if the weight of documented reality had finally settled on him. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. I felt steady. Melissa's collapse came quietly. Her bankruptcy filing became public record. The supplier lawsuit moved forward. An investor complaint triggered a financial review of her failed business. The numbers were worse than anyone had admitted. She sent me one short email. I never meant for this to go this far. I read it twice. It had gone this far because no one had stopped it sooner. I didn't reply. Diane filed for divorce within a month. Irreconcilable differences. She texted me once. I thought protecting him would protect all of us. I stared at the message, thinking about all the ways protection had been confused with control in our family. I didn't respond to that either. My father moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town. I heard through a cousin that he had taken a part-time retail job. The same relatives who had flooded my phone with accusations went quiet once the legal language replaced the emotional narrative. It's harder to argue with court documents than with edited videos. I stopped checking. I transferred every property into an LLC, finalized the filings, and sat down with a financial advisor to restructure my portfolio. New insurance policies, updated security protocols, clear tenant communication. Order. My workplace calmed too. HR closed the complaint once my attorney provided documentation. The whispers faded. The house felt different the first time I walked through it alone without tension hanging in the air. Not emptier. Lighter. That Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner. Not a big gathering. Just a few close friends and the man I'd been quietly dating for the past year. No speeches. No strategic conversations about finances. No undercurrent of obligation. I stood in the kitchen holding my grandmother's old ceramic serving bowl, watching laughter spill across the dining table. For a moment, I thought about the night I stood on that same porch, key in hand, realizing the locks had been changed. I remembered how small I had felt in that instant, how the house had seemed like something I might lose. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I was expected to surrender it. That door hadn't closed on me. It had forced me to choose. Selling the house would not have saved my family. It would have postponed accountability and erased the only boundary I had left. For years, I had confused being strong with being responsible for everyone else's mistakes. Strength, I learned, isn't absorbing impact forever. It's deciding when to stop. I didn't win because my father was arrested. I didn't win because Melissa filed bankruptcy. I won because I stopped letting guilt pretend it was love. Family loyalty is not a legal document. It doesn't override a deed. It doesn't erase a forged signature. It doesn't justify a changed lock. Boundaries don't destroy families. They expose what was already broken. If you've ever been the strong one in your family, you know how heavy that title can feel. You know what it's like to be the one who handles things while someone else is handled. Maybe you've been asked to sell something you worked for. Maybe you've been told that protecting yourself is selfish. Maybe you've stood outside a door that used to feel like home and realized it wasn't safe anymore. If that's you, I'd genuinely like to hear your story. How did you decide where your boundary was? Or are you still trying to figure it out? Share it. Talk about it. You're not the only one who's been told strength means silence. And if stories like this help you think through your own lines in the sand, stay here. There's more to say about what happens when we stop bowing our heads out of habit. The night they changed the locks, they thought they were shutting me out. What they really did was teach me how to lock the door behind me. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.